The president of Biola says the psychology department doesn't believe in or practice conversion therapy. Because according to the culture and the way that phrase is defined, simply telling a teenage boy that thinks they're a girl that they're not a girl would be conversion therapy.
That's the funny thing about these statements is in the statement, he says, we're going to align with federal law, but at the same time, we're going to tell all students, even if you're here illegally, that not only are you welcome here, but you belong here. If you are telling them you belong here, even though you're breaking the law, I would argue you are encouraging law breaking.
Well, it's time to do an episode about Biola University. This brings me no joy, but everyone at that institution is doing smoke and mirrors and staying away from the very real issues that are happening at the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. From being caught endorsing an LGBT club to the provost being a critical race theorist, Biola is finally being exposed for the social justice Christianity they've been spewing. Why does Biola condemn gay conversion therapy? Why does Biola hire professors that engage in divination? Why is Biola booking chapel speakers that condemn white people? Megan Basham, my friend and journalist, joins me today to talk about the article she published for the Daily Wire that exposed Biola University on the national stage and led to concerned emails, podcast conversations, phone calls to that institution. Biola then posted a response to Megan Basham's article, which they refused to acknowledge the source or the author on their Thinking Biblically podcast with the president of the university. Megan and I are going to dig into their response and expose what the heck is going on at this so-called Christian university. Okay, guys, Merry Christmas. We've just launched the brand new Gruberware merch store. That's right, Gruberware merch store. We have a lot of my phrases and favorite coined sayings on t-shirts and even a fun mug. Get the "No, You're a Clump of Cells" t-shirt. Get the "Former Fetus" shirt. Get the "Sassy Since Conception" shirt. Get the "I Identify as Trans Vaccinated" shirt. Get the "I Too Was a Man Trapped in a Woman's Body and Then I Was Born" shirt. And get "My Mother-in-Law Gets My Covenant Eyes" reports, thanks to Seth Gruber. And our coffee mug that says, "Thank you, Mom, for not killing me." I say stuff like that all the time on stages. Put that in your Christmas stocking for your loved one or as a Christmas gift. Gruberware. Click the link in the episode notes. And if you order today, that would be Tuesday, December 16th. If you order today, you can get it in time for Christmas. Enjoy repping the crazy Gruberware pro-life culture war apparel this Christmas. Let's get into it. This is The Seth Gruber Show. Megan, welcome back to The Seth Gruber Show.
Hey, Seth, thanks for having me.
So a lot of people don't like you in... big.
That's not right. They should.
Yeah, I know.
I'm very lovable.
My wife and I love you. Our team adores you. We're excited to have you speak at our Life or Death Con in Washington, D.C. But a lot of people don't like you in big evangelicalism. My friend John Harris describes these people as like institutional managers, not Christian leaders. There seems to be something indicative or endemic to institutions that are so prone to either cowardice or to capitulation or to like takeover by leftists and all this kind of stuff. And we've seen this not only across Christian ministries, churches, publications, a lot of which you detail beautifully well in your book, Shepherds for Sale, which we once again recommend people to read, but also in Christian colleges, to the point that there are like 5 or 6, maybe 7 Christian colleges in the country that I feel comfortable and confident recommending to parents and grandparents when they come up and ask me, like, where do I send my kids? But the one that's been tragic recently has been Biola. Now, for those in the know, it hasn't been recent. It's gone back several years, but it's called the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. My sister went there, Biola in La Mirada, California, in Los Angeles County. I grew up about 25 minutes from there. And they hate me and they hate you simply for talking about wokeness, woke professors, woke policies, woke clubs. While they assure us that there's nothing to see here, we're a super faithful institution. What is your take on what's happening, one, at Biola, and is that indicative of a larger problem in Christian academia?
Yeah, so I'm glad we're talking about this because it is a larger problem within Christian academia. And, when I was working on my book, Shepherds for Sale, one of the most difficult decisions I had to make was what I was going to do with Christian higher ed, because there was so much compromise, there was so much infiltration, there was so much, bad doctrine, bad theology, and, particularly around these issues of wokeness, whether it was bringing in critical race theory or promoting Me Too ideology or, open borders ideology, saying we must welcome the strangers. I mean, so many of these issues, LGBTQ issues, which will feature heavily here in our conversation, I think. And so I had to decide, okay, what do I do with this? And it was so much that I eventually went, this really needs an entire, at least a book, if not a series of books, all unto itself. It's not possible to cover. So what I did was kind of just use a few little representative examples and a number of chapters of various schools. I think I briefly mentioned Biola in the book. In fact, I think it was on racial quote unquote justice issues that I brought up Biola, but I didn't really go deep into what was going on at that school. And I don't want to steal, any credit here from people who worked very hard on it much longer than I did. And, were on this story long before I showed up on the scene. So one of them was Krista Bontrager of the Center for Biblical Unity. Our friend Elisa Childers has also been talking about this. And then Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk had brought up Biola at a couple of different events. So he talked about what he thought was downgrade going on at the school and why he had concerns about it. And that was really when
he told a woman in the audience, Biola's not a Christian college. Ed Stetzer is the dean of their theology department. That was actually the quote. And I was like, oh my gosh, but continue.
Which is so interesting. I really wish I had seen it before Charlie was assassinated, because I would have loved to ask him, okay, what do you know about Ed Stetzer? Because I feel like that's a figure where I am frequently sort of, trading information with people, because Ed Stetzer is so frequently behind the scenes of so many of these movements. But all that to say that I was really very much kind of a Johnny come lately to the subject of Biola, at least, if not Christian colleges more broadly. And so, the reason I ended up doing a story on it was, one, because I was seeing the back and forth between Biola and Krista and Elisa. And so, as a reporter, you just kind of get interested in that and go, okay, well, who's right? Who's wrong? What are the claims being made? Then I saw Charlie's warnings. And so at that point, I had a source reach out to me. And that source said, okay, we see the denials going on at Biola. And I just want to let you know that there is a piece of information that is not yet out. And that was that the head of their Rosemead Counseling Center had declared herself an LGBTQ ally on a mental health website. And also, she had signed on to an amicus brief in support of Colorado's ban on quote unquote conversion therapy. Now, that's a big, scary word, and it's meant to be a big, scary word. It's a pejorative that's meant to picture like electrodes on, people's private parts or something. That's not what we're talking about.
Tell us what that phrase means, because I've seen a lot of Christians, they don't even know what that means. It's very confusing.
Yes. So as Colorado law defines it, it's really any kind of talk therapy that would include Christian counselors bringing the whole counsel of Scripture to the subject of same-sex attraction or transgender identities. So basically, if your Christian counselor is working with you and is saying, look, this is sinful behavior, these are sinful desires, these are sinful identities, and we want to help you align obediently with what the Word of God teaches, that would be outlawed. according to Colorado's ban on conversion therapy. You wouldn't even be able to pray with the client to say, Lord, give me your strength to overcome these desires. That would be considered sinful conversion therapy. So really anything that teaches that you can overcome or mitigate these desires and these sins in any way would be considered conversion therapy. So that is why Alliance Defending Freedom has brought suit against this law. So they're going all the way to the Supreme Court. They're representing a client. I don't remember her first name. Her last name is Chiles. But so they're representing her as a Christian counselor to be able to exercise her free religious rights and her free speech rights to be able to work with clients and do it from a Christian worldview. So that was really kind of the the eye-popping revelation that was brought to me. And that was when I went, okay, all of these things on the table between what Alyssa is bringing up and what Krista is bringing up and what Charlie brought up, this school needs to be written about, particularly this issue with the Rosemead Counseling Center. So that was what I did, was I just started making calls and, talking to students and alum. And in particular, I talked to some current, and they are current, in good standing faculty members who had their own concerns. So I had several conversations, lengthy conversations with them where they detailed to me what their concerns were about what they were seeing on campus. And so I wrote up a report, and that was what we published at the Daily Wire. And that is what has since received a little bit of, I don't know if pushback is the right word, because in this latest interview with Biola President Barry Corey, he doesn't mention me. But it seemed fairly clear that they were referring to me when they said a journalist in the interview.
Yeah. So let's get into all this, Megan. And assuming that my old pal, Sean McDowell, and others who won't talk to me because I asked why would Ed Stetzer be allowed to be hired at Talbot? It seems like he should be under church discipline, not the dean of a seminary. And if you want to know why I just said that statement, guys, go back and listen to old episodes I've done discussing Stetzer in detail. I have a semi-viral tweet on my X about Stetzer's whole record. So if you want like, some gravitas and proof behind why I'd say that, it's all there. But we know that these people are watching these things because they've been mentioning you repeatedly. They've been mentioning Krista and Elisa, if not by name, certainly by content. But in this recent conversation published on the Biola University YouTube channel, their podcast called Thinking Biblically, which is hilarious to me when they bring Preston Sprinkle on 2 or 3 different times, who lives up to his last name, kind of rainbow gay sprinkles on frosting. He is a side B advocate. He says he isn't, but everything he says suggests that he is. But the Rosemead Psychology Center, they bring up in this conversation with Sean McDowell, Scott Ray, and the president, Barry Corey, that professor that signed on to a LGBT thing and declared herself an ally has tendered her resignation. But I want to play this clip of President Barry Corey talking about the topic in question, which was conversion therapy. Play clip 1.
This is long been the position of Rosemead School of Psychology, that they don't teach techniques for conversion therapy or condone techniques for conversion therapy, stating that the scientific evidence of what are the steps you can take to make someone change their orientation sexually. That said, every one of our faculty members and our leaders and our counselors believes deeply in the transforming work of the Holy Spirit that can change lives and the impact that the gospel can have on our own orientations, whatever sinful orientations they might be.
So if I understand this correctly, Megan, and by the way, this is at 31 minutes and 40 seconds-ish for people that would like to go watch it. Barry Corey, the president of Biola, says the psychology department doesn't believe in or practice conversion therapy. So what does he mean by that? Because according to the culture and the way that phrase is defined, simply telling a teenage boy that thinks they're a girl that they're not a girl would be conversion therapy. So is the president of Biola University saying that their psychology department will teach Christian psychologists to lie to people?
So that is a really good question. And I did listen to that whole episode, and that really was something that stuck out in my mind, because when I asked Biola, about this head of the Rosemead Counseling Center and about her position on conversion therapy, they told me that they actually agree with Alliance Defending Freedom, and that they would support their efforts to get that Colorado ban on quote unquote conversion therapy overturned. Because again, I just want to emphasize that really what conversion therapy would be under this definition is called repentance and sanctification. So I would have a lot of questions about, okay, why did Barry Corey take pains to say we don't teach that? We don't teach it in our psychology department. You won't encounter that at Rosemead Counseling Center, because if we're taking the standard legal definition that we have now and what's being used in law across the United States, what it means is biblical practices, things that we must do as Christians. We must, kill our flesh. We must progress in sanctification, and we must deal with these sinful desires in our hearts. So I'm not really sure what they mean by that. And I would love to get a chance to interview him and ask, well, what does that mean that you don't teach conversion therapy at Biola? Because it is very important for anyone experiencing any of these sinful desires. And look, all of us, whatever your sin predilection is, you should be converted from it. That's part of the Christian, walk that we have as in year after year as we become holier and holier.
Megan, we all know the answer. It's because Biola University receives government funds. Probably.
I'll say probably. and the accreditation issue. I think probably accreditation issues come to play in this, that, you have to align with things like the American Psychological Association and things like that. So, but if that's the answer, I would like them to say so, that, these are the things that we have to say or the standards that we have to hold in order to, yes, maintain our federal funding or our accreditation.
Yeah. It's like, author Peter Jones says, compromise with paganism is as tempting for us as it was for poor Lot and his family, who wanted to blend in with the homosexual culture of his day and make an honest living. So anyways, Megan, I was told by President Barry Corey in this Biola damage control interview, where interestingly, a high-level comment, perhaps, Megan, to have you respond to as well. They don't deal with hardly any of the very specific concerns that were brought up by Krista Bontrager and Monique Dusin at the Center for Biblical Unity, or Elisa Childers or yourself, and any of the major issues that were brought up by any of those parties, yourself being part of that. It was sort of like, ha, that's ridiculous. And the rest they just kind of ignored, which I found interesting. Even though Sean McDowell opens the interview by asking President Barry Corey, what would you say to people who were saying that this conversation is just us saying, nothing to see here, we're faithful, nothing to see here? It's like, yeah, well, that's actually kind of what you ended up doing for the next 45 minutes. But I'm wondering how this pro-trans movement, Trans the Kids ally professor at Biola got hired in the first place, because I'm told that it is an intense vetting process to become a professor at Biola. Why don't we go and play clip 2?
It ain't easy. Let me just say that, to get hired here.
Agreed.
The provost and our provost, very strong, theologically minded provost, Dr. Matthew Hall, who had been at a leading evangelical seminary for years as a provost, has been with us for 3.5 years now. We interview every faculty member.
So, Megan, before we get into who this provost is, Matt Hall, what is going on here? Apparently, it is hard to get hired at Biola. Their vetting process is so intense by sound, theologically minded people that you have to adhere to a lot of conservative biblical interpretation to get hired. How would someone like this gal in the Rosemead psychology department get hired in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in the first interview, that it didn't include Barry Corey, but it included, 4 conservative professors at Biola, including people, whose work I like and appreciate. So it wasn't like it was a personal attack on them from me. It was simply reporting what I was learning from students and faculty. And so, one of the things they said is, well, you have to sign this statement of faith to be a professor here. You have to be a Christian here. And, part of the problem is I would go, yeah, lots of infiltrators and wolves and false teachers will sign all kinds of statements of faith to come into faithful institutions and transform them. So, I don't know that is sufficient. And I'm not saying it's all they do, but I didn't think that particular line was a great defense of, here's how we know that our faculty are all stand-up faithful Christians. And then on top of that, you go, okay, well, we know at least, I don't know if this woman was forced out who was leading the Rosemead Counseling Center, but, obviously she resigned shortly after my reporting came out. And then we had another faculty member, and this was someone who Monique Dusson found, who was an art professor who was selling divination kits. So essentially like witchcraft kits.
This is art professor at Biola?
Yes.
Well, I didn't see them bring that up in the damage control episode.
So the specifics were not addressed. And so that was the issue, is that, it wasn't just me. It was a host of people who didn't bring forth, like, we just don't like Biola and we just want to slam Biola or make, innuendo, or these were, documented people like Elisa and Krista saying, look, here's the records. Here's, the chapel talks that were given. Here is the material that these professors taught or that we can find on the university website. So one of those was this art professor who teaches spiritual divination and who sells divination kits. And so again, she's gone too. So, Biola then assured us she's no longer on faculty, which if there wasn't a problem, then why are these people gone? And, I would say a host of quick reforms have been made at Biola in just a matter of weeks, if not, a couple of months, that show they recognize that these things were problems, even if they're not willing to say, oh, hey, gosh, these were problems. So they're saying everything's fine. But at the same time, we're seeing, changes to the human sexuality statement. We're seeing these faculty members gone. We're seeing there was another major change I'm forgetting. I wish Elisa was here, but there were several of these big reforms that were made. Oh, the dwelling, the LGBTQ club
we'll
on
get
campus,
to that
the
today
dwelling
too. Yeah,
is no more. So we're seeing these rapid fire reforms, which if there wasn't an issue, then why was there enough agreement to say, okay, actually, yes, these changes needed to be made and we're going to make them, even though we're not going to exactly trumpet those changes.
It's time to stop sitting on the sidelines. This American revival we're experiencing, especially after they murdered Charlie, the Lord's moving, and it's time for you and your voice to assert itself in this insane culture. If you want to get fired up to defend the unborn, mark your calendars to join our second annual Life or Death Con in Washington, D.C. on January 22nd, 2026. January 22nd in the nation's capital. It's a one-day charge to awaken, equip, and send out believers who are ready to make a real difference in the culture. Because for too long, we talk about this all the time on the show, if you listen here, the church has watched from a distance, from the sidelines, as the battle rages on issues that are fundamentally biblical and theological, but we just do Jesus, we don't do the culture war. That's what's brought us to this moment, but the tide is turning, and your voice, your courage, and your leadership are essential to what's happening next. So we're bringing out the boldest Christian voices and some of my favorite people, okay, to Life or Death Con. Steve Dace, Megan Basham, today's guest, Abby Johnson, Dr. George Grant, Nolene Cedra, AJ Hurley, and more. And then the very next day, march shoulder to shoulder with the White Rose Resistance at the March for Life on January 23rd. So get your ticket, all right, right now for Life or Death Con at lifeordeathcon.com and use code Seth, my name, for 20% off your ticket. And then grab an extra ticket. Make this a Christmas gift, a meaningful gift for a friend or family member who needs to be a part of this movement. I'll see you in Washington, D.C. on January 22nd. And if you're not willing to admit that, hey, like these specific things, because Barry Corey said over and over again in this damage control interview, Megan, we're not perfect. You can't expect, we're humans. We're going to make wrong decisions. There's going to be things that happen. We can't control if a professor changes their minds on things after they've been here 10 years, after they originally got through the hiring process. We're not perfect. We'll try to correct it. But he never said that in regards to anything specific. It was just these general statements. If you have actually screwed up to the point that you're getting like Christian outrage from around the country about your university, you can't just say, well, hey, sometimes things happen. Like if you're going to like axe programs and people in clubs, you have to specifically say where you made an error. Otherwise, and here's why that's important. Otherwise, why should people believe that you're going to not do that again? Not institute, unless you're willing to take personal ownership.
Yeah, and I think, he did acknowledge, I didn't memorize the interview, but I think throughout the interview, there were a couple things he acknowledged. Yes, we changed this, or we made this update, or, but there wasn't an explanation of how did it happen. So how did we get here with, a woman running a major department or a major counseling center at Biola feeling comfortable to declare herself an LGBTQ ally, feeling comfortable to sign an amicus brief opposing Alliance Defending Freedom and their efforts to ensure that Christian counselors can actually use biblical counseling practices. So, that was the thing that I think people are asking questions. They're like, look, we appreciate that you're making a quick change here, but how did that happen? How did we get there? And that's the information that I think people want.
That's right. So one of the things I learned, Megan, and we're about to play clip 4 here in just a second, but one of the things I realized when I was at Westmont College in Santa Barbara, which is way worse than Biola. It's just where Biola is going to be in about 10 years if like a serious change in leadership doesn't happen, is I realized that it always comes from the top. It's the president, it's the provost, it's not necessarily the professors, it's the board, and then it's the staff, the high-ranking staff, president, provost, dean. I learned because I was a pain in the rear at Westmont College, my alma mater. Like, I'm banned from campus. I've had students try to bring me in 3 different times over the last 5 years.
Why does this not surprise me?
I knew you would be very shocked by that. And I launched the first pro-life club that was ever there, and I went on interviews, and I was getting attention from LifeSite News as a 21-year-old for exposing that there were pro-abortion faculty professors on the payroll. But anyways, I realized this is always an up top problem. And so the last clip we played, Megan, was the President Barry Corey saying these very strong theologically minded people who are in charge of the vetting process for hiring, such as our provost, Matt Hall, so he's describing him as a very strong theologically minded person. We have a clip on Matt Hall, but first I want to play clip 4, because my contention is that the provost at Biola, and let me say this, let me be very clear with what I'm saying with Megan right now, guys. The provost at Biola is a critical race theorist. Full blown, full stop, no qualifications. He's a CRT advocate, which is another gospel. It's antithetical, and it's heterodox. But here's Barry Corey talking about critical race theory. Here's clip 4.
Fundamentally, Biola takes the high road on all of these issues to look at areas of critical theory through a biblical lens.
There you go. They take the high road. They look at this biblically, Megan. This is about the Bible. Here is clip 6. The provost of Biola, shortly before he was hired at Biola at a different seminary, here's Matt Hall. Here's an individual talking about Matt Hall, and then Matt Hall speaking. Play clip 6.
Everything that you thought was true about your tradition, your denomination, your own family, there's a whole, I'm going to pull the veil back, and what looked like this beautiful narrative of faithfulness and orthodoxy and truth and righteousness and justice, I'm going to peel that back, and I'm going to show you the rotting corpse of white supremacy that's underneath that surface.
At some point, we got to get to the spot where we are able to look in the mirror and be like, yeah, I'm probably a racist. I'm telling you, I'm a racist because I have a heartbeat, and until I receive my glorified, completely sanctified body, soul, and mind, I'm going to be doing battle with sin.
So, apologies. That was only Matt Hall speaking. That's, ladies and gentlemen, that's the provost of Biola University, who just told you that all white people are racist. Even the most faithful Christian families that love the Lord and serve the kingdom, actually, they all have a rotting corpse of white supremacy under the surface, and he himself is a racist. So the provost of Biola is a racist, and that's what he says about himself. Megan?
Yeah, that's such an astonishing clip. I've heard it a number of times. I listened to it when I was working on my book, because at that time, when I first started working on this, Matt Hall was actually at Southern Seminary, and that is where I think that clip was recorded for some event related to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And there were professors there that were people like Jarvis Williams that were teaching critical race theory and heavily promoted by Matt Hall. So
Matt Hall promoted Jarvis Williams.
promoted his work.
His work.
Yes, and did events.
We haven't talked about him before. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Jarvis Williams and his work and beliefs and writings?
Right. So, I mean, what you would hear from Jarvis Williams would be very similar to what you just heard from Matt Hall there. Jarvis Williams is Black. He has promoted Black liberation theology. I think he's somebody who has, in a positive way, referenced and recommended James Cone and things like that. So, so Jarvis Williams, he was one of the people, and I do want to say it's been a while since I've gone back and looked at Jarvis Williams's records. So let me caveat with that. I didn't know we'd be talking about him today. So, but if you look in my book, he's in there, and you can see, the things that I document about both Matt Hall and Jarvis Williams on my chapter on critical race theory and social justice. And so, yes, they were very much kind of at the forefront of bringing that into conservative evangelical education, both first at the seminary level at Southern Seminary and now at Biola. So, it would be one thing, because I have heard from some people that, and I never know what this means. They will say things like, well, Matt Hall's better now, or he has, he's kind of shifted away from that, or something like that. But my issue is these things are never publicly acknowledged. So if that's true, how do we know it? How do we know that his views have changed? Because it's not like he has come out and said, I got caught up in a moment. It was Black Lives Matter, or it was coming in, from the Ferguson riots. And, so we were all just sort of caught up in this cultural movement, and maybe I went too far and I shouldn't have done that. And I repent from that, and I've changed my views. So we don't have that to go on. All we have are his past comments. And so that's all I can work with. So he went from Southern Seminary over to Biola, and that is who is now essentially in charge of vetting instruction and instructors at Biola. So, is he doing it in a different way and with different beliefs than he did at Southern Seminary? I don't know that. And that's another question that Biola hasn't addressed. Now, what we do know is that Biola, under some pretty strong pressure from people like Krista Bontrager, did eventually shutter that DEI department. And I think that's great. The problem is just, once again, that transparency going, okay, what led to the decision to, after implementing the DEI department and after bringing in some of this, woke instruction, what led to backing away from it? Was it simply that the cultural moment changed, and so you've changed with it? Or have you had a change of beliefs? Did you realize that actually this wasn't biblical and we regret allowing that into our institution? And then further, I think one thing we have to bring up is that it isn't gone at Biola either. The DEI department may be shuttered, but just at the end of September, they welcomed a speaker, somebody named Street Hymns, to one of their chapels. And he gave a talk, I would call it. It was kind of a rap/talk on quote unquote guilty whites. And during that talk, he said he doesn't want to argue with white people who have statistics on the criminal justice system that might undermine that Black Lives Matter narrative of that there's systemic racial injustice against particular minorities. He said, I don't want to hear that. You shouldn't bring up those statistics. And he also said, and this was eye-popping to me, he said that, it may be true that only 2% of Americans in the antebellum era owned slaves, but only 2% of Americans own luxury cars today. That doesn't mean only 2% of Americans wanted them. So he was imputing guilt to people who didn't even own slaves, saying they probably wanted to own slaves, though, those white people. So that was a really astonishing statement to have in a chapel forum at Biola. And that wasn't, in 2020, 2021. That was just a couple months ago.
Well, Megan, but Barry Corey, the president of Biola, told me in this damage control podcast that they have a super strong committee that vets speakers, and they don't just have to sign a statement of faith. They have to adhere to all of Biola's positions on these things, which we were just told in the last clip. Critical race theory, there's no place for it to sneak into Biola because they look at it through a biblical lens. And yet the provost is a critical race theorist, and a chapel speaker 2.5 months ago is a critical race theorist. So are they lying? Do they think we're stupid?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think their statement of faith addresses these issues. So you could say something like, well, yes, someone could certainly believe that the majority of white people wished that they could have owned slaves and still sign that statement of faith, I guess. But you would still obviously, I would hope, have some ideological problems with a speaker like that making a claim like that in a setting that is supposed to be for worship and for learning from scripture, that, you know, it's not supposed to be a social justice struggle session.
Yeah. Well, the dean of Biola Seminary, Talbot Theological Seminary, Ed Stetzer, marched with BLM in 2020. We don't have the picture now, but I have it. You guys can Google it. He's wearing a face diaper, a Fauci face diaper, and he's marching with BLM in 2020. He also endorsed the critical race theory book called White Fragility. Megan, for listeners who don't know, Robin DiAngelo claims all white people are racist, and if you think you're not racist, that's proof of your racism. This is the author that Matt Walsh tricked into an interview in his film, Am I Racist? It's that author he tricked, Robin DiAngelo. And I have a quote from Stetzer here, but I had to go back to the Wayback Machine to find some of this stuff because the dean of Biola Seminary, Megan, is in the habit of axing and removing old articles he has written. You and I could name two off the top of our head that were published at Christianity Today. But he had endorsed this book, calling it a magnifying glass, which helps a person see what is not easily recognizable. DiAngelo has done that for white people with regard to race. We now have the provost of Biola and the dean of their seminary espousing critical race theory. But the president just told us, we're a conservative, faithful institution. You can send your children here. There's nothing to worry about. And we have such an intense vetting process to get hired that things like that don't even seep in because we're so conservative biblically.
Yeah. And, you know, one other thing about this. I don't know Barry Corey personally. I don't have an in-depth insight into his record, but, you know, I have seen him do things like, make statements during the first Trump administration, assuring illegal alien students that you belong here and we will never ask you to leave.
Really?
And yes. Yeah. I should have sent you that before this interview. Yes.
But that means he'd be flouting federal law.
Right. Well, and that's the funny thing about these statements. Is in the statement, he says, we're going to align with federal law, but at the same time, we're going to tell all students, even if you're here illegally, that not only are you welcome here, but you belong here. So, you know, I would say if you are telling people who are breaking the law, and, you know, when we say students, we're talking about adults. These are college students. So if you are telling them, you belong here, even though you're breaking the law, I would argue you are encouraging law breaking.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I brought up the legality side of it. So that sounds like talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Right.
There's a club that recently got removed from Biola, Megan. They're called The Dwelling. They're basically an LGBT group. We were able to find this. We'll put this on the screen for people because Biola recently axed it, which is so crazy because they have such an intense vetting process and these things don't happen, and yet they did. And then they axed it. And then Barry Corey said, we're going to do something new, but he doesn't say why this was able to happen in the first place. It says The Dwelling aims to be a caring and supportive community where students who identify as LGBTQ or experience same-sex attraction can follow Jesus together as they seek to navigate their sexuality and gender and allegiance to Christ by the power of the Spirit, And then it says, things we are not. They're saying this is what The Dwelling is not. We are not a place that sponsors conversion therapy or whose primary goal is to move people out of the LGBTQ community. But then they also say they're a Biola sanctioned club. So they were sanctioned, but also we explore sexuality, but also we are not here to try to help people not be sinners and not identify along the sexual spectrum. Here is Barry Corey, clip 3.
You know, Dr. Corey, one of the first issues that was raised in some of the criticism we faced in the last few weeks has to do with a group on campus that we've called The Dwelling. Can you tell us a little bit about what that group is, what its purpose is, and what the status is of that group?
Yeah, happy to, Scott. Thank you. So the dwelling was structured originally with good intentions of being a supporting place for our students to process human sexuality in a way that is biblically faithful within our own framework of human sexuality, which I've talked about the way in which we understand marriage, the way in which we understand sexuality, the way which we understand sex or gender, and the way in which we understand romantic expression. Romantic expression at Biola is teleological. It's meant to lead you towards what we believe the ideal for marriage is based on God's word between a man and a woman, and sexual intimacy only happening in that context. And at the same time, there was still confusion on the outside. Maybe the ways in which we worded the description, maybe the ways in which it was featured in student newspaper coverage. And so we are making some changes moving forward. So in the coming spring semester, the dwelling will be discontinued, and we're going to do something new.
So there it is, Megan. So, there's Biola's faithful. Why would you need to get rid of this if there's nothing to see here?
That was what was frustrating, right? Was you sort of heard, okay, so Elisa and Krista brought up the issues with this organization, with this club, and what you don't hear there was we recognize that, yeah, that was a problem. It wasn't good that, the leadership of this club and the foundational statement of this club was saying that we're not going to try to move you in a more biblical direction. We're not going to try to convince you that you need to align with scripture and stop sinning. And in fact, it very clearly left the door open. It just blatantly said, we're going to leave the door open that if you are LGBTQ affirming, quote unquote, I hate that language, but that's their terminology, we're going to still welcome you and you can still be in this club, and we're not even going to try to change your mind. So, I can appreciate that sometimes you get some rowdy kids that you wish that they were not pursuing some of the things they're pursuing, or maybe you get some, rogue faculty doing this. But then how did it go on for so long? How were, these foundational documents that were public, clearly approved by someone in administration, allowed this to happen? So how did it get to that point? How did it exist for so long? And why are you choosing to shut it down now? So that was what I didn't hear in that explanation was, here is why, we made a mistake, or we didn't realize, or, we came to think better of it. What I would love is to hear, why are these changes being made?
So say it again, Megan Basham. If President Barry Corey was on the Seth Gruber show right now,
yes, I would ask, what led
him?
up to that decision? So, what prompted you to decide, other than Krista and Elisa bringing it up now, what was it that prompted you to decide that actually this club is not working well for Biola, and it's not working well for Biola students who have these kinds of, sinful desires and predilections? So what made you change your mind and decide we're going to shutter this club? And what's the new thing going to look like? And how are you going to prevent this new thing from taking on some of these characteristics of the old thing?
Megan, there's a phrase about people who want to have their cake and eat it too. That's exactly what's going on here. Because if President Corey and his employees, for that matter, Sean McDowell and Scott Ray, were to say, like, there are several serious issues at Biola that are antithetical to who we are, and it's really bad, and we're dealing with it. If you admit that you have that many problems about your institution, then the question becomes, from parents who are paying their kids tuitions, is how can I trust that that's not going to happen again? As soon as you admit that these were major problems that happened under my leadership, you're indicting your institution. So the better thing to do, according to President Corey, seemingly, is to slowly and silently change things without acknowledging that the buck stops with you and that this was a major problem. And that's where people lose trust in these individuals and what they're saying. Megan, someone put this on the YouTube comments of the Biola damage control episode in response to one of my comments. Here's what this person said. Yes, they are gender affirming. I applied to their MFT program at Talbot, and during my interview with the program dean, Mrs. Bishop, I specifically asked her what her and the program's approach is towards the trans issue. She said, quote, "We just let the client be themselves," end quote, and follow their own path. When I also asked their current students if at least they were being taught that gender ideology is wrong in their classes and textbooks, while only staying neutral during the therapy session to build rapport with the client, the students said no. The textbooks and classes try to either affirm or stay neutral. What they don't understand is that staying neutral in this topic is an affirmation of gender ideology. That's someone who applied to the MFT program at Talbot.
Well, I mean, that is true. That would absolutely, I mean, if that's accurate, that would be true. And I think it's consistent with what Barry Corey said about their stance on conversion therapy, because that would be considered, quote unquote, conversion therapy, trying to teach students that your whatever you feel your gender is not what we recognize as reality, but how God created you is what we recognize as reality. So, I mean, in fact, if you look at ADF's legal briefs on this, they have said that if a Christian counselor under this definition of conversion therapy were to try to teach a client that your identity is false and you need to actually reintegrate with your biological identity, that would be banned as conversion therapy. So in a way, what that commenter there on YouTube is saying is consistent with what Corey said about their position on conversion therapy. And one other thing I want to make a point about here, Seth, is that I don't think you can look at each of these issues in isolation, right? So we have the human sexuality statement that at one point seemed to leave the door open. In just a very recent history, it seemed to leave the door open to potential trans facilities. So, we would have a discussion.
Tell that story. We didn't even talk about, gosh, there's a lot going on at Biola that they seem to have not covered in their damage control episode. Methinks why. But can you talk about that story with the soft language they had? It almost seemed like they were ready to play pronoun patty cake, and then they changed it. Can you talk about that?
And Elisa Childers was the one who caught this and spoke about it and seems to have sparked a change of what was going on at Biola. But their previous, until just a few weeks ago, human sexuality statement said something to the effect of if a person is experiencing that kind of gender dysphoria, they didn't use that language. They didn't use the term gender dysphoria. I am. But if a person is identifying with something other than their biological identity, we will work with them to decide, the best way to approach using facilities. So it didn't just say, you're going to have to use the facility that, aligns with your biological identity or, your biology. It said, we will work with you to, decide how best to handle that. So that seemed to leave the door open to saying, maybe a man could use a woman's restroom or vice versa. So my point being, so let's take all the pieces here. You have the human sexuality statement. You have the dwelling, the LGBTQ club saying we are going to not try to move you in a biblical direction if you think gay is fine. We're not going to do that. Then we have the Rosemead Counseling Center issue that they had a woman running it who was a quote unquote LGBTQ ally who is opposed to conversion therapy, which again, repentance and sanctification. So we have all of these things coming together and you go, oh, and there's one more that I forgot that I covered in my reporting was that I spoke to a faculty member who said, we received training on how to handle these issues. And I believe it was a Professor Muha, I think it was Muha, I'll have to check it, but who conducted this training. And this faculty member told me it was very side B, and they presented to us two different examples of how we might approach the issue. One example was Preston Sprinkle. The other example was Rosaria Butterfield. And Preston Sprinkle was held out as the winsome, Christ-like way to handle the issue, whereas Rosaria Butterfield was held out as someone whose model you would not want to follow. So if you take all of these issues together, it's not like we're just saying, here's one isolated piece of information that somehow slipped through the cracks at Biola. You actually have to go, we seem to see a pattern here. We're seeing a trend again and again. And also the trend is it doesn't get addressed until some outside whistleblowers bring it up.
But first, we want to thank our sponsor of the Seth Gruber Show, our wonderful friends at Every Life Diaper Company. Every Life actually believes that every life matters. Unlike, shockingly, the majority of the baby brands and diaper brands in America, who our friends at Every Life found out support abortion. It's a very weird thing. I mean, talk about the woke mind virus, where you would sabotage your own ability to make money for your company because of ideology. That you would support and fund and celebrate the killing of babies, which means that you don't sell as many baby stuff. Like that's next level demonic stuff. The way that you and I fight against the culture war, the most simple way is shop in alignment with your values. And my friends at Every Life are believers. They love the Lord. They love the unborn. They're incredible people. They're actually personal friends of mine. So I can vouch for their personal credentials and their integrity. Go to everylife.com. If you're having babies, if you're loved ones, right? If you're having grandkids, get your adult kids Every Life this Christmas. Everylife.com. Promo code Seth10 for 10% off your first order. Get your diapers, your wipes, your baby shampoos, your baby lotions, and their new FemCare line. Promo code Seth10 for 10% off your first order, and let them know that we sent you. Thank you, Every Life. And when they do, they're criticized as being mean by Thaddeus Williams at Biola, who specifically went after you because you weren't nice enough. He published a video, the thumbnail of which was Biola is not woke. Okay, that was the thumbnail. Is it Williams? I believe it's Thaddeus Williams. And him and I got into it on Facebook. And I said, me think the lad doth protest too much. Stetzer is a critical race theorist, promoted white fragility, called Francis Mengele Collins a Christian brother, and helped advise on the woke he gets a Super Bowl lad. Oh yeah, guys, by the way, the dean of Biola Seminary was an advisor on the he gets a Super Bowl ad, which showed woke intersectionality. And the head of your counseling department is an LGBTQ ally. Biola can prove it's not woke by firing those people. And you can prove you're not a hireling by calling out your employer for not firing those people. He called me to repent for not being nice and for slander. But when you publish a video that says Biola's not woke, and then you don't address any of the specifics from Christian voices showing wokeness. But can you talk about that? Because I think he went after you and maybe even sort of misquoted you. And was very frustrated about your coverage at Daily Wire.
Yeah. And, I don't really know Thaddeus Williams. I've read his book. I liked his book. I liked some of his work. So it certainly wasn't personal. But when I watched the video with him and the three other Biola professors sort of trying to burnish Biola's conservative bona fides, it seemed very obvious to me that, as you were saying, it seemed like a public relations interview where they didn't address the specific issues that not just I brought up, but that all of these other people have brought up. And so, one of the things I said about the interview was that it gently mocked the idea that Biola is woke, because of course the title of this particular video, I think there's been 3 videos now, so I want to try to keep all my videos straight. But this first video that was Thaddeus Williams and 3 other conservative Biola professors was titled, "Is Biola Woke?" And obviously, throughout the breadth of the interview, their take was no, it's not. But again, they didn't address the specific issues. And at one point, Professor Fred Sanders said something to the effect of low information having online people are just giving their opinions. And he said, I wouldn't do that with Liberty because I'm not on campus at Liberty, so I don't know what's going on at that school. So I would never talk about what's happening at Liberty. And so I said in my reporting, because you have to do this, I can't do a blow by blow on a whole, 2 hour long video. I have to just sort of summarize in a sentence or two. So as my summary of how Biola was responding, I said this interview came out that gently mocked the idea that Biola is woke. And I think that was a fair assessment for the breadth of the entire video, where they kind of laughed at the idea that Biola would be woke. And they did not, Thaddeus and others did not deal at all with all of these other issues I brought up, and they said, we didn't gently mock, he wasn't referring to gossip. And I was like, well, he actually said the word, Fred Sanders, who I don't know him either. He may be a great guy, but he did say the word gossip. He did say, low information having people and gossiping. And So I just kind of picked those things out as part of their response. And so I see this a lot. A lot of journalists will tell you this will be the typical response when you're critical of an organization and you bring up specific criticisms, specific issues that people have brought to you. What they want to do instead is argue about semantics. And that's really what I would say that was, because I think if you go back and watch the entire interview where they're laughing at the idea that Biola is woke and the video itself is titled, "Is Biola Woke?" it's fair to say it was gently mocking. But again, that was just a quick summary of what happened. And he took issue with the title. And boy, have I been through the title wars over my book. So that was nothing new to me. I didn't pick the title. My editor picked the title, but it was, something about, making a Christian college Christian again. And so they took great umbrage with that title. And, that's fine if you want to argue about the title, but it's not going to make any of these issues that were in my reporting or in other people's reporting go away.
At this point in the conversation, Megan, I don't know if I could even appropriately restate all the issues. Divination, deck card sales, chapel shaming white people. Oh, by the way, Tim Mulholland, I don't know how to say his name. The guy who you mentioned a little bit ago, he appeared on the Thinking Biblically podcast, which they need to rebrand that. That's not thinking. Most of their episodes are not Thinking Biblically, but he appeared on an episode with Sean McDowell. And Tim, who's a professor at Biola, was advocating for using people's preferred pronouns.
Well, so that would track with what the faculty member told me and the concerns that they had.
That was like a year ago or a yearish. I don't know. Anyways, that was not that long ago. And recently, Sean McDowell finally sort of started saying we shouldn't do that. But of course, he's not going to call out the psychology department. He's not going to call out his boss. He's not going to call out Tim. But even Thaddeus, who's a professor there who did the whole Biola is not woke thumbnail, he's basically like, honestly, most of these men, I'm just going to say it because these people are never going to come on my show anyways. They're just effeminate, Megan. And what I mean like
I'll let you say it.
Yeah, they're like Joey in the show Friends. He's like, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. Right before he says, oh my gosh, I am a woman. Like that's literally, it's that. Thaddeus and all these people, they're just offended that you would say these things and not come to them and inquire and ask questions. It's like, no, she's a journalist and she's getting super concerning tips. So she wrote an article about it. Be a man and deal with the problems at your employer.
By the way, I'm so glad you brought that up because one, I did go to Biola. I went to the appropriate Biola representatives. I went to the administration and I asked them these questions. I didn't ask stray professors because my experience is stray professors generally will direct you to the spokespeople and to the administration. But the other thing was that I think Thaddeus took issue with, well, why didn't you come to us and ask us about this public piece of content that we published and put out on YouTube for the world to see. And so I just once again want to underline for people who think that the journalistic requirement is that you have to call and speak to the person anytime you're going to reference anything. No, that is not the case. When something is a piece of public content, a piece of public writing, a book, a film, a video, you are allowed to just comment or summarize on it without every single time going to that person. And to that point, they talked about me and my writing and my reporting on a subsequent interview, and they didn't call me to ask me about it, and that's just fine. It's fine that they did that because it was my public story. So I expect comment and response, and you don't have to call me first. It's okay.
Oh, you're a grown-up, Megan. You're a grown-up. Yes. We have one more clip here, Megan. Clip 5. Listen to this.
President Corey, there was a recent article about Biola, and the journalist said, quote, to avoid this trap, one Biola professor advised parents to prepare their kids to be just as alert and cautious as if they were going to Berkeley. So I'd love to know, what would you say to this unnamed professor and also to people who have read that?
I cannot imagine any faculty member at Biola ever saying anything like that. Obviously, that person has either never been to Berkeley and has some kind of a utopian version of what that institution is, or they're on some kind of hallucinogen. like think about it. Like we are so profoundly missional in our Christian orientation. Think about it. Our students come here and they have to minor in the equivalent in Bible. No other nationally ranked university does that. Like how distinct is that from any other school? Think about the expectation of our own faculty and the theological roots that you hang on to so deeply. I'm baffled that someone would even have that line to say. And maybe it was a long time ago part-time faculty member or someone who's left here bitter. I don't know, but that is not the Biola I know, and that's not the Biola that you gentlemen know either.
I share your concern and response 100%.
So, Megan, that's you. You're the journalist.
I am the journalist, and I will agree that it's a little effeminate not to just say Megan Basham wrote this article at the Daily Wire, and here's why we take issue with it. I do think it would be better to just say...
Well, they don't want people to go read it. If they name it,
we
people might
don't
read
like
it.
what she said, and we disagree with that. I think that would be a little more manly to just, let's have it out. Let's just name it and, say it, and let's do this.
Tell us about this tip you got.
Yeah, so... that one did offend me a little bit. I'm not easily offended. Most of the time, when I get this kind of response on a lot of articles I write, and you just kind of go, well, institutions don't like to be exposed. They don't like to be criticized. So this is a typical response. It doesn't surprise you. But this one bothers me because it suggests that my reporting was somehow dishonest or deceitful, and it certainly wasn't. So the person who gave me that quote is a current faculty member, is a full faculty member, is a serious and sober-minded person. And more importantly, I want to say it's somebody who cares about Biola. So they made that comment to me, not because they're trying to destroy the institution or because they don't want to see students coming there. It's because they are doing what we're supposed to do per Jude 1. They are contending for the faith. They are contending for this Christian institution. And so this faculty member did tell me that, yes, when you send a student to our school, you should approach it just as if you were sending your student to Berkeley. Now, in saying that, he was not saying that Biola and Berkeley are in the same place ideologically. He's not saying that you are going to receive identical instruction. So, I actually find that a little deceitful because that was not the parallel that was being drawn. What the faculty member was saying is that as a Christian parent, you would know to be cautious when you're approaching Berkeley. You would know that you want to vet the professors and the classes and the programs. And so all he was saying is that you want to bring that same level of caution to Biola. You can't assume that because it is a Christian school, you don't have to do your due diligence and you don't need to bring that, equal level of caution. And I think it was a really well-made point, and that was why I included it in the story. So it wasn't to say Biola is just like Berkeley, but it was to say that actually, and I think this is really true, is that sometimes students can be put into greater peril when they go to a Christian school because they don't have their guard up in the same way. And if you look at something like Elisa's book on, how progressive ideology and progressive theology took hold of her, it was because it was coming from somebody who claimed to be a Christian, who claimed to be of the faith. And that is what gets confusing and can really cause a crisis of faith or cause deconstruction in a Christian student. And that's why it is so important to be careful. So I really appreciated that faculty member saying that. And by the way, I quoted from these faculty members, I think that same faculty member also saying, look, of course there's still good biblical teaching at Biola. Of course there are still, sound professors and sound instruction. But that was his but. However, we still need to be careful. And so, that was the thing that I was a little bothered by. And I would have liked for them to acknowledge that we're not happy that someone at our school thinks that. And we're going to look into what's causing them to have these concerns.
Right, exactly. Because if your vetting process is so amazing and these professors are so amazing, then you should value their thoughts and what they have to say about where they work. And I completely agree with your take. And I'm actually pretty ghastly disappointed and shocked at the effeminate treatment that Scott Ray and Sean McDowell and President Corey gave to this tip from a sitting faculty professor who spoke to you, whose content you put into your article, because that's clearly not what they were saying. I knew exactly what that unnamed professor meant when I read your article, Megan. I read that and I went, of course, because when you go to Berkeley, you expect gay communism. When you go to Biola, you expect the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. And so when you're a 20-year-old, maybe new believer looking to your academic, theological, and spiritual fathers to form you, to release you into the world for the Great Commission, and then you're getting wokeness tied into orthodoxy, and you're being taught that this is how Christianity operates, you're creating woke Christians who aren't aware of what's happening to them. That's obviously what that person meant about having to be on your guard. And so how disappointing. And
a lot of ways it's more dangerous. And that was something that...
Because it's a slow creep.
Yes. And our friend Everett Piper just recently...
Oh, I love Everett.
He had a great op-ed about this in the Washington Times, I think it was, where he talked about, in all of his years in Christian education, he came to realize that in some ways, he said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, I would tell parents now, send your kid to the secular college because that may be safer for them than sending them to the Christian college. And, so that is maybe the thing to sort of wrap it up with, is that the reason this matters in talking about Biola is because it's such a common pattern across the Christian higher ed landscape, so that we cannot no longer talk about it. So, I'm sorry if Biola, feels like they're getting singled out here. Maybe I can do some more reporting on other schools, because I hear of very similar issues, and in some cases worse issues at places like Point Loma Nazarene and other schools.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to talk about there. And again, I'm sorry that they feel singled out, but maybe they should feel singled out because people care about Biola. There's a lot of alums there who are solid Christians. And so part of what they're feeling and hearing is people who love that institution, and they're trying to reform it, and they're trying to ensure that it stays today what it has been to all these past generations of Christians.
Yeah. Amen, Megan. And here's why I care, because, obviously I run a pro-family organization to wake up the church. It's pro-life, it's culture war-ish, but it's primarily focused on the unborn. But the reason that I get into all these various things on the show, guys, particularly when it comes to Christian academia, is because that's actually the root of so much of the problem. Like, one of the reasons that most pro-life people feel like the church isn't on their side, the pastors are not on their side, they're not in the fight. Well, the answer, guys, is because most of the institutions where those pastors were educated, seminaries and undergraduate colleges, did not equip them or prepare them to see this as a gospel biblical issue, did not give them the full counsel of God. A lot of it had social justice tied into it. And that's why you see so many pastors capitulate to BLM and George Floyd and CRT and all of this nonsense, because the institutions they're being trained at. Actually, Charlie said this once years ago at a talk. I was sitting live in the audience. I think it was at CNP, actually. But he said that the seminaries of America are one of the biggest problems in America right now. And so it's like, I guess we'll finish with this, Megan. Why is it that there's all these issues at Biola, but none of these issues are cropping up on a regular basis at New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho? I'm really confused.
Or, one of the things they said repeatedly, I think in a number of these interviews, was that, well, we're a college in California, so we have to deal with the reality of being in California. Well, you know what else is in California? Masters University. And I don't hear any of these issues at Masters. So, that's another question I think they would have to answer as well. Somehow Masters is able to function in liberal California, and it is still able to hold to biblical orthodoxy on all of these various social issues.
The answer, of course, is leadership. Yeah. That's the answer. Leadership and the board. Everyone knows that, Biola. Everyone knows what you're doing. And if you're not willing to say, we screwed up big time, we did not lead well, this shouldn't have happened under our watch. If you want us to take it seriously, you're going to have to say that, and then you're going to have to start firing people. Like someone said on the YouTube channel, Megan, and I said this as well. They said, if you want to prove you're not woke, fire Ed Stetzer right now. And it's like,
I would back that. Yeah.
It's hard not to argue with that. So, well, Megan, where can people purchase your book, Shepherds for Sale, or follow your reporting?
Yes. So you can get a lot more background into all of these kinds of issues, and probably how some of this stuff is coming into Biola and other institutions. In Shepherds for Sale, how evangelical leaders traded the truth for a leftist agenda. That's you'll find it at Target, Amazon, Christian bookstores, anywhere you buy books, Barnes & Noble. You can find me on X. I hang out there way too much at Meg Basham. And I'm on Instagram at journalist Megan Basham. And you can always find my work at Daily Wire.
Awesome. Megan, thanks for joining us today. You're very deserving of the Boniface Award that my mentor, Dr. George Grant, presented to you a year and a half ago. We're proud of you, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Thank you. You too, my friend.
See you in DC, guys. Megan Basham speaking at Life or Death Con. Okay, you hear that? That's me interviewing her. What if we just let her speak uninterrupted? Okay, this woman throws down fire. Go to lifeordeathcon.com, lifeordeathcon.com. Get your tickets now for January 22nd, Washington, D.C., the day before the March for Life, joined by Dr. George Grant, Abby Johnson, Steve Dace, AJ Hurley, Nolene Cedra, and more to hear this warrior woman who joined us today. Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is The Seth Gruber Show.